Shut up and sit down.
Hi, and welcome to ctl-alt-del-church. And this week, Kenny and I are joined by Graeme McMeekin. Great to see you, Graeme.
Good to be here.
You are looking very corporate, so we don't have to guess who you work for. You are in charge of Tearfund in Scotland. So can you tell us a wee bit about what does that mean?
What does that mean? That's a very good question. I think I'm still trying to work that one out myself. I head up all our operations here in Scotland. Tearfund, I don't know if you know, well, I know you know, Stuart, but I don't know if others know that it's an international development organisation. And we've got kind of three main areas that we work in. We do humanitarian relief, so those times now there's earthquakes and tsunamis and things like that. We provide humanitarian relief. We've got something called community and church transformation, where we work with churches in order for them to do community transformation work. And so community development work, where they're equipping communities in terms of training them to start up new businesses or things like that. And then we do advocacy work as well, so lobbying governments and other things to try and do the work to prevent people getting into poverty in the first place. And so we do that. So I oversee all our operations here in Scotland, which includes a bit of most of them, but a big part is actually fundraising to try and support the work that we're doing overseas. We work in about 50 countries around the world, so trying to raise funds to actually help some of that work.
Brilliant. I guess over the last few months, the focus of that work, has it changed an awful lot, or is it similar but compounded by the coronavirus pandemic?
Yes and yes, I suppose is the answer. It's changed a lot because everything, as it is over here, everything is all sort of COVID talk, and it is overseas as well. We've had to adapt a lot of our operations and a lot of things that we were doing to actually think through, okay, what is needed in this COVID environment. Working in 50 different countries, you have 50 different lockdown rules that are involved, 50 different requirements about PPE, personal protective equipment, things like that, and the dynamics in each country is very, very different. So what we've been trying to do is support the operations that are going overseas to most suit their environments. So what we're doing is in some countries we are doing things like health messaging. So we hear on a daily basis from multiple news sources about whether we should be sort of 2 meters apart, or what the social distancing might be, or what that means in terms of hand washing. Over there, you might not have the same news sources, so getting the leaflets out and the public information out. And in actual fact, in some countries, people might not even trust the government who's announcing them. So actually hearing these from other credible sources, such as faith leaders, is actually really, really important. So we've been getting that out for some places. For other places, it is things like providing PPE equipment, so people can actually sort of have face coverings, etc. In other countries, it's quite different. It's things like whenever people are actually literally having to rely on getting their daily bread every day by actually going out and working on that day, and you're in a lockdown situation, you can't go out and do that work. So in some cases, it is looking at, okay, how do we do food supplies? How do we get the basics out there? And then in other places, we talk about hand washing, but you can't wash your hands if you've got no water. And so in some places, we're doing sort of hand washing stuff as well. So that varies from country to country. And in some areas where we're working in large refugee camps, like Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, which has got about 1 million people in it, over 34 camps, they just don't have things like the water systems that you would normally have installed, because these camps were practically built overnight. And so we're trying to provide what we can in these instances. So everything's kind of where we did a lot of that work before. We're now all concentrating around the kind of COVID type stuff. So the health messaging is around COVID stuff, and where we were providing and supporting people in training for business stuff, we maybe had to look more towards, okay, well, what do you need now so that you can get to the point where you can do business stuff as well. So a lot of it looks quite different in terms of our overseas work. And then even in UK, it looks quite different as well, where we used to have lots of fundraising events and things like that. And when you suddenly discover that nobody can meet together, none of those events kind of take place. So we've had to kind of sort of change tact and have new fundraising campaigns. We've had, feels like half of Scotland's been walking up their stairs fundraising for us, which is great. So we've had to change a lot of these things and just adapt to what's going on.
It always brings a kind of real creativity, doesn't it? They say that necessity is the mother of invention, and that's been the case in all kinds of ways, I guess, in terms of your work. We've noticed here, and I guess that's one of the big issues, that the news has been so concentrated on what's happening here that we haven't really heard much about what's happening beyond Europe and America. We've really very much concentrated on the kind of Western hemisphere, which I guess is one of the issues that we face all the time anyway, that we don't get good news from other places. But I guess at the moment the situation here has been compounded by poverty. So if you are poor, you're much more likely to suffer the effects of coronavirus, and it's much more likely to make you much more ill, and that your chances of recovery are less, and all the kinds of things that we already know. Being poor is bad for your health. We've always known that. But the level of poverty in the places that you're working in is, 10, 15, 100 times worse than even the poorest places here. So what for people that don't really understand what that looks like, you talked about Cox's Bazaar. What does that look like?
Well, in a place like Cox's Bazaar, they literally have, as I say, there's about 1 million people, all concentrated into 34 camps. And people here might talk about social distancing. It's just impossible there. It's literally bamboo sticks with tarpaulin covers, and they're all right next to each other, completely concentrated in. So, whenever you're at that level of poverty, the chances of catching things is just immense. It's just impossible to avoid people. It's impossible to cover everybody's face. It's impossible to sort of stand back. And as you say, the poorer you are, almost the more likely you are to be affected. In Scotland, we've heard about places like Inverclyde, perhaps, where there's been a sort of surge of cases, or other areas where maybe pockets of poverty where that's been the case. But actually, overseas, it is exactly the same case. Those that are richest will actually have the best resources to try and avoid catching it, and those that are poorest will actually have it. So refugees is a big problem. So in Cox's Bazaar, I should have explained, is in Bangladesh, and there's a lot of Myanmar refugees that have travelled over. Also, you have Venezuelan refugees as well, that have similar issues as well. So refugees are one of those that are most affected. But actually, in rural communities all around the world, and places that are affected by things like climate change as well, they're particularly affected because of drought spells, and you don't have the same access to water and hand washing and everything else. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Those that are poorest will be affected most all around the world. It's part of the great injustices that we have around this world.
So those problems exist anyway, and then you throw a global pandemic into the mix, and it's just chaos, I guess. That you lack basic infrastructure, you're lacking healthcare professionals. I remember when we were talking about social isolation here and protecting the NHS, and some of the stories about, well, if you live in Cornwall, there's only one hospital that's got an ICU unit, and for the whole of Cornwall and Truro. If you're talking about somewhere like Cox's Bazaar, there is no ICU beds, there are no ventilators, there's no sterile environment anywhere. And that,
there's some countries that don't have a single ICU unit in the entire country, and it's just remarkable. We have just down the road from where I am, we have the SEC, which in a matter of just 2 weeks or something like that, managed to create an entire hospital out of it. In a lot of these countries, they just don't have those resources, and just isn't even a single ICU bed or ventilator in the country, and it's a real issue. So if it spreads in areas like that, there's nothing that they can do. There's just not the possibilities of ventilating, and so the potential death rate is just massive whenever you get up to that kind of stage.
Yeah. You talked about fundraising and being creative. So one of the things that folk have been doing is climbing their stairs. So climbing their stairs for the height of Ben Nevis or Kilimanjaro, or something like that. So where did that come from?
Well, it came from that necessity element that you were talking about before. We we're due to do actually some other fundraisers just as the pandemic was starting to hit. We were one of the challenges that we've been doing for the last few years is something called the Mean Bean Challenge, where people just eat sort of beans and rice for a week. However, just that was due to take place just at the end of March, and just as we were all going down into lockdown, we took advice from some doctors, and some doctors basically said, that's not such a good idea. No. That's not a good idea to weaken people's immune system at a time whenever actually we need people to be prepared. And we thought, okay, well, what can you do? Well, if everybody's stuck in their house, actually, you know, what could people be challenged to do? And many of us, not all of us, but many of us have stairs, and thought, okay, right, so, okay, you've got stairs. How many times can we actually get people to climb this? And we thought we'd create some targets, and so we thought, well, okay, let's do a different range. So you can do Ben Nevis or Kilimanjaro, and we had a third one in there as well. I can't remember what the third one was actually. And most people have done Ben Nevis or Kilimanjaro.
Tell me it's Everest. And
I was going to say, is it Everest or K2 or something?
I think it is Everest. I think it is, but I wasn't going to say that just in case. Okay. And basically just been going up and down the stairs just constantly. And you know, I'm somebody who actually I like to go out and enjoy a good run and do that. Treadmills suck the life out of me. You know, the idea of being on a treadmill, and you know, you can do it for 10, 15, maybe 20 minutes, you know, but you don't want to do hours on it. Yeah. Going up your own staircase is a bit like going up a treadmill constantly, you know, and it's, you know, most people's stairs aren't particularly exciting. So actually, it's actually more it's not the physical exercise, it's actually the mental exercise that goes with it. And then the number of people who have actually done that and actually thought, well, at least I'm getting my steps count. And then they realize that actually going upstairs takes a lot of energy, but not a lot of steps. Yeah. And so they're actually struggling to get their step count for the day, whilst they've actually climbed, you know, sort of over the course of the week, you know, Kilimanjaro. And they kind of go, how come? You know, I'm knackered, I'm fitter and everything else, but I haven't actually even got my steps. And doing that. But as I say, it was literally, what have you got in your hands, and what have you got round about you to actually do that? I suppose that's one of our great mottos within Tearfund, is actually trying to get people to use what's in their hands. You know, in the same way that Moses, you know, was asked, you know, by God, what do you have in your hands? Well, I've got the staff. In the same sense that in the feeding the 5,000, you know, the boy was asked, you know, well, what do you have for your lunch? You know, sort of bread and fish. You know, well, how can God use what's in your hands? In this case, what was in your hands was what's in your house, and it was a staircase. So, you know, let's use it. Why not? And do that.
And people can still join in with that. That's not something that's stopped.
That's not finished yet. Yeah, people can still join in. You can still climb your stairs if you just go on to the Tearfund website, tearfund.org/the-climb, and you'll find all the details there.
The other thing that seems to have happened in lockdown is that people have become good at sharing music and stuff. And I noticed that you've been having some lockdown sessions.
Yeah, we've had a couple of lockdown sessions. Really, from around about May in particular, we've focused quite a lot on doing the lockdown sessions where we had various artists. Tearfund in Scotland over the last number of years have actually become quite known for some of our concerts that churches have held, where they've had the kind of concert with organised by Tearfund, where we've brought an artist along and they've done a concert as part of it. I thought, well, how can we translate that in some way to something that's maybe online? So fairly quickly we managed to get our lockdown sessions up and running. We've had people like David and Yvonne Lyon, we've had people like Steph McLeod, and a whole range of others that have actually taken part in that, and they've been very, very well received. You know, it's provided a bit of energy on a Thursday night most nights to do that, and they actually just get a little bit of that kind of culture going, and people just to talk about their experiences as well. So yeah, people have enjoyed tapping into that. But again, it was out of necessity. Okay, how could we do something a bit different and do that?
I suppose one of the difficulties that people have is that we, on the whole, have absolutely no experience of the kind of issues that the people you're working with have. And so, you know, one of the reasons we wanted to speak to you was to hear about some of that. You talked about the rice and beans challenge. I spent a week in Cuba a while ago, and we had rice and beans twice a day for a week. And, you know, on Wednesday, it was getting really, really old. you know, and they do different things with the rice and the beans. You know, it's
Different
not that it's the
spices and
same.
things, yep.
Yeah, but it's rice and beans every single day, and you look forward to breakfast because that's fruit, you know, and it's just something different to eat, and the kind of monotony of that, and a place where you probably didn't really expect that would be the case, you know, that the diet would be so limited. So I guess that I'm not going to call it a perk because that's not the right word at all. But you get to travel as part of your job to see the places that Tearfund worked, and so that you can understand better the issues and that you can come back and tell people like us all about them. So where are some of the places that you've been?
Yeah, I tend to tell people that I've got the greatest job in the world, where I've got the privilege of telling people what God's doing all around the world, and so that has meant a bit of traveling. So I haven't traveled terribly much. I do travel about once a year, and that hasn't been the case this year for fairly obvious reasons.
Yep.
But places like Uganda and Rwanda are two of the places where I went to quite regularly. My first Tearfund visit, sort of ever, which is about long before I actually worked for Tearfund, whenever I was volunteering with them. And I went to Soroti, which was in the sort of northish of Uganda, and in that area, and actually stayed in a mud hut village as part of it, and got to experience what real village life was like, staying with a family there. And you realise just quite how rigorous it was, just the kind of daily routine. You know, things like, you know, you got up first thing in the morning, you'd farm your land, you'd kind of weed it out, make sure that kind of the crops are growing, your cassava, which is a kind of vegetable type plant, you know, is growing well, and you're doing that, and you get into experiencing what real life was. You know, you get a tour around the person's garden, you get to see this sort of 4 foot high anthill, you know, and they tell you, well, actually, you know, this is what I make bricks out of, you know, or whatever, and you just sort of get to see some of that experience. Flip side of that is, you know, as I say, I've also been to Rwanda a couple of times, and you know, Rwanda, unfortunately, is probably best known to us for the genocide that took place there about 25 years ago. And as you go around and as you see that, you know, you experience the hurt and pain that was there. You know, I was in a church where you could still see the bullet holes and bloodstains of what went on. But also you get to see the flip side of that and the healing. You know, on that particular trip, I met a couple of people who go to the same church, and one was responsible for killing the other's husband. And you know, and you realise that actually the healing that's been going on within the church, you know, in working with victims and perpetrators of in that kind of situation, and the challenges of that. So you get to see all the highs and lows of that, and there really is highs and lows. You know, you get to see abject poverty, and you get to see the joy on somebody's face whenever they're drinking water, you know, that's out of a tap that's just been built next to them as well. And so it's really quite an experience.
Yeah. It's interesting that in Rwanda they haven't, on the whole, kind of papered over and spruced up, so that, you know, there are still bullet holes and things. They haven't fixed them, they've left them. And I think every village has a genocide memorial.
That's right.
To remind them of what happened, you know. And we're in the middle of this big conversation about what we do with our inconvenient history. And I think there's probably a lot that we could learn from places like Rwanda, who have really had to grapple with stuff that's fairly recent, but, you know, have done it in an incredibly honest and difficult way. But it's brought, as you said, a kind of real healing to people who were awful to one another. And, you know,
So certainly in a lot of African cultures, storytelling is really important, you know, and people being able to tell their story, their narratives from their perspective. And, you know, there's no papering over and glossing, but there's also a realization that actually that is someone's narrative. It might not be your narrative, but it's someone's narrative. And so we can have sort of 2 conversations in a day, one from somebody who has been sort of the victim in some senses of what went on, and realize that is their narrative and that is their story. But also you hear it from the other side of, you know, the person who is actually, you know, responsible, and you hear it from their side of the story, and that narrative sharing is actually really important. It's not saying that actually one's is more important than the other, but actually hearing both stories. But for me, before I worked in Tearfund and sort of a wee while ago now, I used to work in victim offender mediation, and the whole aspect of that, and that was working in Glasgow actually with young offenders, and bringing sort of a young offender with somebody who would be claimed to be their victim together and with their families. And trust me, actually bringing their families together is actually more difficult than bringing them together. And mothers particularly are very protective of their sons, in that kind of atmosphere. But bring them together and actually having all the people, and by all the people I mean also the families, sharing their narratives and their experiences of the hurt and the pain that has been caused and what has happened before it and the context and understanding it. That kind of story sharing is just so important. And yet over here, we tend not to share stories. And it's been interesting, particularly with the Black Lives Matter movement recently, where actually we've not been listening to stories. Mm-hmm. And actually all of a sudden we're now getting a wave of stories of people's experiences of prejudice and racism and things like that, that actually for many of us, we just didn't want to know it beforehand. Yeah. And also to some extent, I don't think people wanted to share it beforehand. But now there's a kind of avenue to kind of go, okay, well, actually, what is your narrative? And I think that has to go both ways. I think we also have to understand the white narrative and the black narrative, and all the kind of different narratives from people's racial perspectives, also gender perspectives as well, and actually hear the stories and not say, actually, you say that, but actually that's not true, or that's not quite how it happened. That's their experience and their perspective, and we need to honour that and respect that and listen to it wholeheartedly. And most of all, ensure that people in the future are not going to have the same sort of issues or perspectives or anything else that might have been from the past, just because we need to listen to each other and respond to each other. It's just so important.
Is that passion for that kind of sort of restorative justice and storytelling, does that come from your upbringing? Your accent is not from the west of Scotland, it's a bit further west.
Yes, I'm a bit further west. I remember sort of lots of people in Scotland used to say, "Oh, do you live in the east coast, the west coast?" And I would say, "Well, I come from the east coast of a western land." I come from just outside Belfast, and yeah, I grew up in the midst of the Troubles, right in the middle of it. And there are some people who were hardly touched by the Troubles. I was a bit more involved. My father was in the police. And that actually did make us a little bit of a risk at times. We were on a hit list at times as well as part of that. And so it was a very sort of interesting experience growing up, let's put it that way. And there is still a lot of historic hangovers sort of from there. And my father would always reverse park his car so he could immediately sort of dash out and drive his car away if there's any problems. If you look at my driveway, both cars are reverse parked. And that's just, these things are kind of ingrained within you, and you can never really fully dismiss them. But whilst he was in that experience, it was interesting for me to understand that let's say, I had to wrestle with the fact that actually I was in some way privileged. We talk a lot about white privileged. But actually I've had to wrestle with the fact of being Protestant privileged in Northern Ireland and what that actually might have meant. I said my dad was in the police. The majority of policemen were Protestant, and the issues that kind of sort of were spoke by that. It's a little bit more balanced now, but I think there's still a bit of weighting to it. And so it was kind of wrestling with some of those issues and what does that mean? The fact that I grew up in an all Protestant area. I didn't have many Catholic friends at all, and trying to wrestle with that and wrestle with the fact that I felt uneasy about that, even growing up. And I just felt that there's something inherently wrong with how these things were divided up. And whenever I moved to Scotland about 25 years ago, I had to wrestle more with that and understand more about what that means. And I remember one particular occasion where I was a youth worker for a church. And I was invited by the local Catholic priest round for lunch. And I was sitting there having lunch sort of thinking, if my sort of myself 10 years ago had seen this, or if any of my family saw this, they'd have a heart attack, and realize that. But actually having that sense of relationship and realizing that actually we need to hear the stories of the others, and sectioning ourselves away, being in our silos, sort of having our, in my context, Protestant-only communities, and actually, it doesn't let you hear voices. It doesn't let you hear people's stories. It doesn't let you sort of see the experiences of others and learn from them and think, okay, well, how can I reach out to it? I suppose for many of our churches, we have to actually think, okay, what are all of our communities like? How do we reach out to them? Because how can we do mission with folks that actually are different from us? And the white middle class church is just too common. But actually, we need to look and say, okay, well, what are the other voices? And if we don't know them, then how can we ever reach out to them as well?
I think it's one of the real benefits of organisations like Tearfund that allow us to come into contact and to hear the stories of people we would never meet. And that I always find is hugely beneficial to me, as someone who is in some senses, the receiving end of those stories. But also it reminds us, that we're incredibly connected. You talked earlier on about climate change. My choices affect someone else in Bangladesh. Mm-hmm. Whether I remember that all the time or not, they do. And it's not until I start to hear that person's story about how climate change is wrecking their landscape, their economy, their lives, that I start to realise my part in that kind of bigger picture. It would be very easy for me to live my little life here in my nice little white middle class bubble, and to think that my life has no impact whatsoever on anybody else. But it does. Of course it does.
Absolutely does. And it's so important. I'm actually just going to move to the side a little bit and hopefully show you a picture here, down here. This is where you also see that there is other things behind. But that's our Bisa, and she lives in a region of Ethiopia called Afar, which is in the northeast of Ethiopia. And my colleagues went out from the Scotland team out in February to Ethiopia and met Orbisa. And where she's sitting in that picture is a riverbed where they would actually have had rain about 4 months over the year, but now they just get it a couple of weeks in August. And that river would normally have been flowing. But actually over the last 4 or 5 years, it's just dried up more and more and more. So that actually, as I say, rain is now only a couple of weeks in August. That riverbed is 5 minutes from her house. She now needs to walk 5 hours to get water and 5 hours back. And so she's leaving at 4 a.m. She's coming back at 1 o'clock to try and get this water. And, to do so, it's not even just as a straightforward walk. She's faced with hyenas and leopards and all sorts of other dangers walking in the middle of the night to try and get this water. And you realize, well, yeah, we kind of know why that's happening. Yeah. Why is this getting worse? And we're kind of faced with it and say, well, actually, we have a responsibility here. We are to blame to an extent, and we need to think about that. But yet, it's easy for us. And I talked earlier about silos, not hearing other people's narratives. It's easy for us in Scotland to kind of switch off to the impact of climate change. Whereas she's on the other side of the world. She's in Ethiopia kind of going, I don't know why this is happening. I've got no idea why things are drying up. And, we keep the information to ourselves that actually we might be to some extent guilty of it because we don't want to share that and we don't want to wrestle with that.
How do you, just kind of going back to the storytelling a little bit more, how do you think all of this, the very reason that we're having this conversation, COVID-19, has affected particularly white middle class and screenagers and Generation X, Y, Z, whatever, the too long didn't read version of stuff that people always post isn't necessarily the focus anymore because people have more time to engage with stories and have more time to engage with understanding decisions and things like that. So do you think, in a way, as dreadful as COVID-19 has been, it's actually helping you tell stories more and people are listening more now? Do you think that's something that's happening? Is that something you're seeing?
Yeah, we're getting above the headline. Where in the past people would have just kind of sort of got to the headline and then moved on. People are definitely more interested to kind of hear more. The more life has slowed down a bit, the more we're actually able to read and to understand and do that. So yes, absolutely, it is helping to get the story more. However, the flip side of that is because the overarching news stories is all about what's happening in our local areas, actually we haven't quite had the mindset shift to think internationally yet. And so one of the things we've been lobbying the Scottish Government, for example, to do is actually think about what does recovery look like, and what does a just and green recovery look like, and try and think, okay, well, as we think about our local neighbourhoods and change here, how do we actually do that in a way that actually is going to be better for those all around the world and impact them and do that? Because and then it's about trying to get the story out and saying, actually, this is how we need to do it. Because as I say, people are reading more, but actually their ability to read the international stories aren't quite there yet. As well.
So what does that look like then? What does a green and just recovery look like? Because I have a sense that we've been talking about a new normal for quite some time, and that people nod and smile, but actually in the back of their heads they really just can't wait to get back to how things were before, because to change is inconvenient. So what does that look like for us, do you think?
Well, in many ways, it's thinking about just those everyday steps. So, why rush into adopting everything that we were doing before? For many of us, we might have commuted to work via a car and used a car. And I mentioned earlier that I've got 2 cars, sitting in my driveway, and one was for my wife to get to work, one was for me to get to work. And the cars are currently getting a run once a week, and even that's on a rotational basis. And sort of one car's out one week for a run, and the other car's out the other week. And it's like, well, actually, we just don't need the 2 of them. Even for my work, it's 6 miles away. I would have got the bus or the train normally there, and I'm not particularly wanting to take buses and trains anytime soon, and do that. So actually, the idea of cycling to work is actually a much more realistic option. Cycling or running in, and that's doable. We need to think of, okay, what's the alternatives? Holidays, where we might have sort of taken sort of flights on holidays, then actually we need to sort of rethink that. And even for things like business trips, the number of business trips, and there are kind of short haul business trips. We in Tearfund don't do that. We actually, within the UK, we're always taking the train. Sort of whenever we're traveling about, even anywhere in Western Europe, and we take the train there. But actually, for others, as part of your business thing, actually, why are we flying whenever you're literally only saving about an hour? You can be down to London in the train, in about 4 hours. You factor in check-ins and everything else in airports, and you're literally saving an hour, but actually the damage it's doing to the planet for that is just quite incredible. So just trying to do those simple things that actually make a difference to climate change, which makes such a difference to people like Orbesa. It doesn't take much to kind of make those changes in our lifestyle and our general working as well. Likewise, with the number of things that we've maybe done, evenings and separate activities, we actually realise that actually maybe being in the house a bit more is actually not a bad thing, and sort of spending that as opposed to rushing about all over the place.
I think that's certainly something that I was very guilty last year. For example, I got my bronze status with British Airways, my bronze executive club membership, because I was flying to and from London City for business that often. And I've sat back and thought, I think I probably needed to make 2-3 of those flights out of 25.
Yeah.
Well, not 2 or 3, like 2 or 4 or whatever, there and back. But and the fact that my car, I got the car that I've got, we have 2 cars as well. One's been off the road for a while because we didn't need it, and we just thought, no, we'll take it off. We definitely don't need it now. The one that I have, I've driven 5,000 miles fewer than I expected to in the year that I've had it. And guess what? I don't need it for that many miles, because I can work from home. I can do whatever I need to do. And it's made me realise an awful lot of what I do being very hypocritical. I will lead my youth group on a Sunday morning and say, right, what are you doing about climate change? And then jump on a flight to the Red Eye on a Monday morning to London City with 50 other people or however many other people and think, no. It's kind of, it's made me wake up genuinely, like even just having the conversation with you as well as hammered home just how much waste there is. And again, it's frightening when you think about it. How guilty you can be.
It's all been a cultural thing. So we've got into a culture where for businesses, you would all fly places and do that. Whereas actually we've been able to break some of that cultural norms, and now we need to think, okay, well, actually, can we create new cultural norms? Okay, so the cultural norm we've broken might be doing those short haul flights. We've broken it by doing none. We might have to do some, but let's reorganize it and think, okay, how can we do this differently? And likewise, how can we move things on to using Zoom or sort of other kind of media that we can actually do video conferencing instead? Because actually, I certainly knew that working in an international organisation, we still actually had quite a lot of face-to-face meetings with the UK staff.
Yep.
And now that all the UK staff have got used to working at home, they're actually it's much easier for me to work from home and not have to travel down to London, for example, to go to meetings and things like that. Whereas we can actually all be on a level playing field to some extent with the kind of technology.
Yeah, I think what we found is we would have done the same. In my previous job, I'd have been up and down to London, usually on the train. So you'd be at a 3 or a 4 hour meeting, and it would take you 8 hours to travel. And partly that was because if you joined by video, you were the person who was joining by video, and it was really unsatisfactory because you're on a screen in the corner somewhere, and everybody ignores you, and you don't. Whereas if everybody's on line, it's much better. It's
parity, isn't it?
It's a much better experience. We're all looking at everybody, and we're all here. There's nobody on the screen over here who's trying to attract somebody's attention or whatever. And it's not until you do it that you realise, well, this is fine. This is fine, and I don't need to spend 8 hours of my life on a train, or sitting in an airport, or whatever that might be. Well, and the cost that's associated with that, not just in terms of your time, it's crazy.
And that, and I mean, perfect example. Graeme, Stuart and I both serve on the same committee at Hamilton Presbytery, and we've had the best turnout at our last 2 meetings than we've ever had because we did it on Zoom or Teams, whatever it was, one of them. And Presbytery was the same. There were 90 people logged into the Presbytery meeting, and you think, right, okay, it's probably genuinely there needs to be a way that you can look at doing this, because I mean, we were talking as well, like the group I'm part of at church for doing stuff with kids and young people, we're talking more and doing more together than we ever have as a result of all of this. We're meeting every Tuesday night. We're meeting on a Thursday morning as well, depending on what else we're doing, and we're meeting on a Sunday with the kids. So like you said, the social norm for what is normal has changed completely. And like a friend of mine works in a call handling centre for like mobile phones and broadband and stuff like that. And they're shutting their offices because they've had a 12.5% increase in productivity with people working at home.
Yeah.
And it's not just been a spike at the start, it's been consistent across the 3 months. So their business has said, we don't need office space in Glasgow. We need some meeting spaces in case we need to meet, but we don't need it. And the fact that that's happening, again, shows that societal norms are going to shift in the next 6 months. Because the impact of this, not just now, but like you said, in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months' time, will be totally different. The economy will be totally different to what it was. The landowners, the renters and all of this will be like, I've not got any clients anymore, because guess what? People don't need offices.
And that opens up the global economy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it then doesn't matter where you are.
Correct.
And we've seen that in some of the kind of sort of the tech boom in places like India and across the different places that now that gives access to a whole load of people who didn't have access before.
The most recent example I have of that is just a couple of weeks ago. I was at I was at the Scottish Parliament. I was virtually at the Scottish Parliament, where there's a cross-party group on international development, and I've joined in a couple of times. Quite often you get maybe about 30 people there. So some of them would be MSPs, other people would be people in the international development sector. We had the group online for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and we had 100 people involved, and we had a lot of them were people who were in the countries where we're doing international development, and you were getting voices from the field. You weren't getting somebody like me who was saying, well, this is what our country rep in Mozambique says about this. What you're getting is or well, in that case it was Zimbabwe. You're not getting me telling you what Zimbabweans think. You're actually getting the person from Zimbabwe telling you, well, this is what's happening this morning, where I live, and this is the issues that we're facing. And in some sense, we're all kind of looking at each other, kind of going, why didn't we do this before?
Yeah.
Why is it taking this long and this big an event to make this cultural shift to do something that is just sensible? And realizing that actually, there's much more chance to actually get some of those voices from around the world. And go ahead.
You see, I think part of the reason for me for that, in my experience, would be fear. Like, it's one of those moments when, because when we were talking about doing having a conference call with loads of customers to talk about what we could do for them, just as an example, let's say it's hypothetical. The objections I would get with that would be, what if somebody says something that's wrong? What if somebody says something that upsets this person who's over there, and that's gone, because people just have to accept that, you know what, this is how it's going to work. And like you said, I think it starts to paint things in a much more positive light as well, because you're getting it from that person. You're not then having an email or a message sent to someone which is then condensed even more, and maybe, not that I'm suggesting you do it, but fluffed a bit to make it sound more popular or whatever, and not to rock the boat, when in actual fact the person in Zimbabwe is turning around and saying, no, this isn't working and we need help with it. And hearing it like that is a lot more powerful and a lot more beneficial, I would say, rather than the round the table patting on the back when, oh, Zimbabwe's going really well, isn't it? Yeah, and that's it,
And it's a conversation. It's not just here's what's happening, and that's a statement. There's no interaction with that. It's a conversation, and you can ask the person who's telling their story, so what does that mean for you? And you start to get below the kind of surface level thing that we all do. You talk about the top line issues, and then, but actually, you dig deep into that. You start to have conversations about water and toilets and shelter and basic medication and all the kinds of things that security, global pillaging of places. Mm-hmm. I'm going to take you back, Graeme. You mentioned that it was the Scottish Government's Department for International Development that you were at. I'm going to ask you a nice juicy.
I knew this. I was about to ask the same question.
So the UK government have announced that they're going to merge two departments, so the Department for International Development and the Foreign Office, and aid agencies like yours think that's an incredibly bad idea. I have no idea why that's an incredibly bad idea, so can you tell me why it's such a bad idea?
Without losing your job.
Okay. Without losing my job. I shall tell it how it is as best as I can. So there are two main international departments at the minute. The Department for International Development, that we know as DFID, which is actually independent to some extent. They have a lot of autonomy to try and think through, okay, what are the needs around the world, and how can we actually address this? So how can we address particular needs that are there that actually, some of them have been long-standing needs, and some of them may be a response to a humanitarian crisis. But they can actually respond to that quite quickly, and they do it through the international development sector, where there's organisations like us that they'll listen to and hear, okay, what's happening on the ground? Okay, how do we respond with that? The Foreign and Commonwealth Office is actually much more about economic strategy. So where are the countries where we want to kind of invest in doing, where we maybe want particularly maybe something like manufacturing to take place, or things that are kind of from an economic perspective. By merge, I'm sorry, I should say, sometimes it's defence related as well, but that would be connected to the Department of Defence. But by merging the two, what actually happens is that the need element of what people need is overtaken by, okay, well, what is our national interest? What are the UK interests in this? And so, we'll give you money to meet your need as long as you do X, Y, or Z for us. And that is, going back to almost the old colonial mindsets that we had of, we'll help you as a society, but as long as we can sort of pillage your fields, or do whatever it might be. So, and that relationship just is a very dangerous place for us to be in. And it's almost, the merger is almost like reversing the years that we've done of trying to build up and empower sort of nation states and places to actually say, well, actually we'll give you as long as we can get what we want to benefit ourselves in the UK and the UK economy. And I'll be the first to say the UK economy is going to be in a bad shape after COVID. There's no doubt about that, as are all states around the world. And there's no doubt that part of this is actually to say, well, how can we be in a better state from this, whatever the consequences are to others, and do that. And so it is driven by a UK economic focus, by merging the two and actually saying, it's not to say that we won't help people around the world, but we'll do it on our terms, and as long as we can get what we want, that will benefit our economy, not on the basis of what people need in order to survive and thrive.
I suppose it's the difference between the slogan on your board behind you, your neighbour is thirsty. It's the difference between saying to somebody, here's a cup of water, and we've got some water that we can sell you for $1 a bottle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it'll always be kind of driven by, okay, what can we get in return? Whereas DFID doesn't operate like that at all. That's not the mindset behind it. The mindset behind DFID is, how can we genuinely help, knowing that actually by helping our neighbour who is in need, around the world, actually helps us all to some extent. It makes it, a safer world. If people are less in poverty, then actually we know that there's less likely to be corruption in places. There's less likely to be sort of political sort of uncertainties, and that actually helps us all globally to be better off. Whereas this merger kind of takes that away a little bit. One
of the ways that you work is to empower churches to empower communities. Why is that important, do you think, for us both here in Scotland and around the world, that the church should be a place that's empowered to help others?
It's an interesting question. That actually is one of those questions where is what I've almost lived my way off for the last 20 odd years, but actually very, very little to actually stop and think why and what is the rationale behind it. I suppose in some senses it goes back to the storytelling. If we're listening to others and listening to their needs and also their skills and what they have, then actually that's much more effective than us giving them what we think they need. And we've been talking about your neighbour is thirsty, behind me, and in many cases development has been, let's sort of drill a well for you, and we'll drill this well in somewhere where we think you need it, and this is what you need. And then what happens is that sort of a few months down the line, maybe a year down the line or whatever, the well breaks, and actually nobody's going to fix it. They don't have the skills to do it or anything like that, and it creates a dependency culture on some of the gas coming in and doing that again and over and over and over again. Whereas it's not actually what the people need. The people need to almost work out their own way of solving the problems and see why it's important as well. So quite often we'll do sort of support people in business skills, but we don't tell them what businesses they should be starting. We'll say, okay, well, what are you good at? What's and what have you got already that's useful? Do you have a field? Okay, well, what could you do with that field? Oh, grow onions, right? Okay, well, let's see, what would you need to grow onions? Well, okay, well, I would grow onions here, but I'm 200 meters from the river and it really needs a lot of water. Okay, so what do you need to get that water there? A pump. Okay, well, how can the rest of the church here help you get a pump so you can get your onions? And working that through with them. And then they realize, actually, yes, we have been able to do that. We've actually sort of got the skills, we have the abilities within us to do that, and actually the sense of pride that comes from that, and knowing that actually we can do that, and we're going to look after this because we know that we've been a big part of it, and it's something that's come from us, and we know there's a market for it, and it means that they know how they can encourage a market or whatever else to sell the products. And so it just works so much better having that kind of empowering mindset. Also believe it's, biblical throughout, that actually, even just if I think we're not long after Pentecost, the whole concept of Pentecost, that God would give the Holy Spirit to empower us, as the church, and fill us. It wasn't a matter of, sort of God going zap and sort of all done. He wants to do mission through us. He wants to work through us. That's the empowering God that we know. And that's always been the case.
And that was a sending out, wasn't it? So I think one of the fascinating things that this has that's happened to us is that we've all been sent out. One Sunday morning the doors were shut and everyone was sent out into their community. And I was having a chat this morning with some folk from our congregation who have been talking about how they notice their neighbour more. That they just notice when people aren't around, or if they haven't been about for a couple of days, or they're much more likely to ask if there's something that they can do to help. All that kind of stuff that I think I started to write my sermon for Sunday this morning, and one of the things I was kind of reflecting on was that isolation's a massive issue in Britain. We've all just had an experience of it. And if we go back to just ignoring it again, then it's been a pointless experience. But hopefully for some of us, we'll remember how that felt, that you weren't allowed to see somebody and that you couldn't give them a hug and that you didn't see anybody for 6 weeks and all that kind of stuff. That's people's reality. People live like that every day.
Yeah.
And so part of that experience, that sharing in something with somebody, I've always liked trying to understand what a word means, and we talk about Jesus being full of compassion, and compassion means to enter into somebody's suffering with them. It doesn't mean feeling sorry for them. It means to get right in there with them and to try to feel what they feel so that you can understand what the problem is. And we see Jesus doing that again and again when he asks people, what is it you want? He doesn't just assume, because you're blind, you want to see. He asked the blind man, what do you want? What is it that you want? Because knowing that changing that will change everything about his life. That giving him his sight back changes everything. It's not just that he can see, it's that his whole situation will change, because he'll no longer be a guy that sits at the side of the road begging. He'll be a guy that can see. And that's what Tearfund does. It changes people's situations completely by changing a small thing sometimes.
Yep. So I just need to agree.
That's a first. Graeme McMeekin agrees with me about anything. It's brilliant.
It's just so true that actually, in some senses, it can be just such a small change, but actually, the sense of worth and value that comes from it, is quite incredible. I was chatting to somebody out in Rwanda, I think it was 2 years ago, and what had happened was that Tearfund had been working with the church, and one of the things we were able to support was an agriculturalist to come and sort of meet with the church members, and this man's talking saying, I'm struggling to get my bananas to grow. And and he's able to kind of go, well, actually, it's this type of soil. Actually, this is the type of banana sort of would grow better in this soil. And just even that smidgen of information is all that was needed for him to not only to grow his own bananas, but actually he transformed all the church's land into banana fields and started growing that to help the church. And the money raised from that was actually helping build bricks to build people's houses in the local community. But it just took that little smidgen of information that actually it's just the wrong type of banana you have. Is all it took.
Yeah. You and I have known each other for quite a long time.
I don't think how long it might be.
It's a while. Because in your previous life, you were a youth worker, and then you were many things at International Christian College and its subsequent incarnations. And we kind of worked together trying to encourage people to be involved with young people here. And it seems as though a lot of the things that we were talking about for all those years are the same kinds of issues that you're still talking about. The kind of idea that it's good to empower people, it's good to give them the tools to live their lives and sort out their own problems and understand their own situations. So I guess one of the questions that we've been asking everybody that we've spoken to, Tearfund's a Christian organisation that's interested in mission as well as development. So where do you see the church in Scotland heading in the next 6 months, a year, in this kind of post coronavirus environment? What do you think that might look like?
I think churches have become a lot more aware of their local communities and doing that. That actually, where we have had the focus of let's gather, we'll run activities. If they build it, people will come to us, to our things that are happening in our building. By being, sent out, as you said earlier, and that having that mechanism that we're actually in our local communities and actually seeing what that service looks like, it's having to change what we think about in terms of mission. The risk that we have is that instead of come to us, they say, well, come to our website or come to our Zoom meeting or come to whatever as an alternative, which I think would be a wrong way to go, but I think there is the potential to go down that road. I think all churches are now, in the same way as we might be wondering, and we were saying earlier about rent and how, and office space and everything else, and about how office use changes. Actually, we are more considering about our church space use. And I know a lot of people are very sensitive about talking about church buildings and whether we should have them or not. But I think the use of those church buildings will inevitably change as a result of it, and what we actually use them for. And we will need to think much more missionally about, okay, what is in our community? What are we hearing from the people there? How can we serve people more? And so I think getting that listening to take place, and in some cases that might be joining your local town's Facebook group and hearing, okay, what are people talking about there? And I live in Renfrew. Yesterday, all people were talking about was the fact that there's a cruise ship going to be coming up the Clyde, the dock in the docks right next to Renfrew. And actually that's what the community were talking about. And actually, in a post-COVID world, you can be saying, well, actually, if that's what people are going to be doing, and then actually, why wouldn't we sort of have a stall down there or provide people with sort of ice creams or whatever it might be, trying to think, okay, well, how does that fit into our mission? But if you're not listening to what's happening on the ground, then you're never going to actually be able to reach out. So I think people are going to have to listen more. But as I say, the wrong thing would be for us to flip it to, okay, we've been running church on Zoom, let's keep doing.
You just come to our Zoom meeting. Yeah.
Come to us, and it's like, well, actually, no, you need to continue to be going out and doing that, and think of other ways of listening and moving out. I'm thinking of, and I think we can't ignore as well that I don't think the coronavirus situation is actually separate from Black Lives Matter, because I think one is provide the context for our discussions about Black Lives Matter. But I think there will actually also be a look at, okay, what does our church look like in terms of culture, race, ethnicity, gender, and disabilities, all these things, and trying to think, okay, what does our church need to be more inclusive as part of this? It's not specifically around the coronavirus situation, but it is one of these sort of offshoots where we're actually thinking, okay, well, are we a church that is truly representative of the community that we are trying to represent or trying to reach out to, and do that? And how do we do that more? What needs to be done to try and do that? And that might mean we think through our leadership. Church of Scotland, for example, how diverse is our eldership in terms of race, ethnicity, gender, and disabilities, etc. How do we embrace that, and trying to look at that across leadership levels, but also in terms of the ministries that are being led by various people, and trying to reshape that. And that's going to have, I think, an even bigger impact if we really embrace that fully, as opposed to just glossing over it and saying, well, that was something that lasted a couple of weeks and we're going to ignore it. we truly grasp that, then we're going to have to ask some really big questions
Yep.
of how we structure and lead our churches.
Yeah, we've noticed people have accidentally engaged with people that they hadn't been engaging with because of this, but it's been accidental. It turns out that doing your services online allows you to talk to people who are housebound. Who knew? But it wasn't high on our list of things that we wanted to do. We paid some lip service to that. So I think you're right. It's a difficult conversation because it has to be an intentional one, doesn't it? We have to look around and see who's around us and start to ask the question, well, why is it that actually everybody that comes to our church is in a particular age group or a particular income bracket or a particular ethnicity, or why is that?
Our church has got quite a lot of young families in it, and it's been particularly interesting. We've tried various midweek sort of prayer meetings and things like that, and tried to get them off the ground, and they've been very, very rarely attended. But then sort of went into lockdown, and almost immediately we started having sort of Wednesday night prayer meetings. And we've got really great attendance at it, far more than what we ever had. And then you have to ask, well, why was that? Well, nearly every single one of them have, children that had to be in bed, they couldn't get out of the house. They're maybe single parent families. That one parent can't get out, and even if there's sort of two parents in the house, it's still not kind of feasible often to try and get out. But actually, having an online sort of prayer meeting has actually it's now the highlight of most of our weeks. Is actually to kind of join in with that, and you kind of go, well, why didn't we think of this before? But actually,
we weren't listening.
Either weren't listening, or we thought, why doesn't it? It's the whole thing of, oh, nobody would do that. Why would people come online and do it? We need to ask the question: are we asking the right questions of our congregation and of our community to say, are we actually helping you, or are we just giving you use of our halls for cheap, and that's why you use us? And that's the cynic in me talking, but genuinely, is that the case?
And the other thing is that we need to be cautious is that we've been so reliant on digital technology during this period. We need to also look out for the digitally excluded that are in it. And I've had quite a bit of contact with a refugee family who have actually started doing some stuff with our church, which is great. But actually, them tapping into the technology has been actually a bit of an issue. And you realise that actually there's lots of people who are asylum seekers or refugees, and also the sort of elderly and infirm that actually have really struggled with some of the digital technology as well. And so if we jump to over-reliance on that, in the bid to try and be inclusive of families and others, then we might actually end up excluding another group altogether. And so we need to make sure that we have an awareness of the whole range of people that we need to be looking out for.
Graeme, we're almost at the end of our time. What are the things that we could do to help you? So what can churches and individuals do to help Tearfund to do its work?
The most obvious one, and in some ways the easiest one, but also the one that people find hardest to commit to, is pray. And I tell people that it's actually easier for me to get people to give money than it is to get people to pray, which sounds bizarre, but it really is. No, please pray for, and we're as I say, Tearfund work in about 50 countries, and about 35 of them we're doing specific coronavirus work, and so just please pray for each of the countries that are there. We have representatives in the countries, but we're primarily working through the local church. So it's about sort of trying to get the messages out and praying for those that are in need in those situations. But also, if people do want to give and support, they can either do that through donations, so you can do that through tearfund.org/give, or through fundraising. So things like the climb that we talked about earlier. You can climb up Kilimanjaro, and you can wear your woolies by the time you get to the top, just by climbing up your stairs. So many flights a day as well. And you can find out the details if you just look up the climb on the tearfund.org website as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. It's been brilliant to speak to you and to hear all about the stuff that you're doing.
Thank you both.